Okay, hi, my name is Lisa Kelso. I'm one of the lead trainers and Director of Learning at the Environmental Academy. And what I'm going to do as part of this Environmental Excellence Award scheme is share with you one of the exercises we run in one of our classroom-based training courses. It's based on what makes a good environmental policy. So I'll start by saying that an environmental policy is a very important document within your environmental management system. It's the one top-level document that you will be able to communicate to all of your interested parties. That's all of your stakeholders, including your staff internally, your subcontractors, your clients, your competitors. Anybody that asks for that policy, you have to be able to make it publicly available to them. So it's the shop front for everything that you do within your environmental management system. The problem is, it's so easy to come by one. You could do a quick web search now. You could look up one of your competitors right away, find their policy and simply make a few changes to it and make it your own. But it wouldn't be worth the paper it's written on. What's the difference between a good policy and one that you simply generated just for the point of having that document? So first of all, I'm going to give you a few top tips for writing an environmental policy. I'd start off by thinking about who's going to have to be able to read it and understand it. So the important thing that you do is that you make it jargon free. Think of the language that you're using. Don't use environmental language or even industry specific language that other people outside of your organisation or your industry won't understand. So we'll start off by saying it should be a simple, jargon free document. Think of the language that you're using and how that will read. The next thing you probably want to think about is how long should it be? Is it something that's going to be several pages long that you could use as a PR document and send out with all your sort of tender applications and so on? Is it something that's going to be quite small and that you could frame and put in your reception? That's something for you to think about. There's no right or wrong answer, but I would say as a rule of thumb, I would keep it as short and concise as possible and probably aim for around about 1 page. So we'll make that the next tip. So okay, so that gives us an idea of what your goal is and where you're going to start from. So when it comes to actually writing the policy, it probably is a good idea to do some internet research or phone up some of your clients and your customers and ask them to post it out. As you'll remember from the beginning, they have to make their policy publicly available to you. So you shouldn't have any problems accessing some examples. Okay, so we'll probably start with a brief introduction to the company. So you might want to put an introduction that sets the scene. Say what your company is, what your services or your products are, what it is that you do. Set the scene and explain who your company is. The policy has to be appropriate to your business and your aspects and of course your potential impact on the environment. Don't make that too long, just a few sentences. You probably then follow that on with saying, making some sort of acknowledgement that like all businesses, you have the potential to have an impact on the environment, but you're committed to doing what you do in a responsible way. So that takes us on to the next point. What would be the content of that policy? What do you actually want to stay within that policy? Now, if you're going for an accredited environmental management system, like ISO 14001, there are actually 3 specific statements that you do need to make within that policy. So I'll tell you what they are. As I said, you're going to start with an introduction explaining that you're committed to running your business in a responsible manner. So what we want to do is explain that commitment a little bit further. So the company is committed to 3 things. First of all, and extremely important, compliance with legislation. Obviously, compliance with environmental legislation should actually be your minimum operating standard. You may even want to rephrase that in a way to say that you will strive to operate above and beyond your minimal accepted operating level of compliance with legislation. The next thing that you'll want to do is explain that not only are you committed to best practice and complying with your minimum operating standards, but you're committed to continually improving your standards of performance. So continual improvement of environmental performance is part of any environmental management system and should be at the core of everything your management system is trying to achieve. And finally, you will also be committed to the prevention of pollution. Obviously, any company that's responsible in its operations towards the environment is committed to preventing pollution at all costs. And you'll have a series of procedures and operational control practices in place in order to prevent any pollution from occurring. So now you've set out your commitment, you'll also want to expand on that a little bit further. One thing that you also need to do is make reference to objectives and targets. Now, objectives and targets are basically the means to achieve this continual improvement that you've stated here. You don't need to say exactly what your objectives and targets are, although you may choose to. Some companies state within their environmental policy that they're committed to reducing energy consumption by 5% before the following year, or committed to recycling as a minimum 85% of their waste, etc. But you don't need to quantify or put down detailed objectives and targets in your policy unless you specifically want to. However, you must make reference to the fact that you do set them and you do regularly review them and you do implement your objectives and targets. Okay, so you've got a bit of content now to your policy, and that should state exactly what it is that you're hoping to do. Something else that you'd expect to see on a policy to make sure that this actually happens is you'd expect to see that there's some top management support. Now, often that appears as a signature at the bottom of the policy statement, signed and dated by the managing director, the CEO, or whoever is the top management within the company. If you don't have that person's support, this policy isn't going to be effectively implemented. So it doesn't have to be a signature on the policy. It might be other evidence. You may have documents of board level management meetings or alternative evidence to show that you have that support, but the easiest way for your customers and your interested parties to see that is if you put a signature at the bottom of the policy. So top management support, for instance, a signature. And right beside that signature there's something else that you'd like to see, and that's a date. Now, that date allows anybody who's viewing the policy to see that it's current, that it's actually a live document and it wasn't written several years ago and then that was sort of the end of it. So if we put down here, that it's current, and I'd say as a good rule of thumb it shouldn't be any longer than 1 year old. Any policies that display a date that's more than a year old really does raise concerns about how actively it's actually implemented. If you review your policy annually, it may be that there's no significant changes to make to it, but at least to show that you've reviewed it and you've considered it and updated it shows that it is still a current document. Okay, we're getting towards the end now of this list of top tips for running a good policy. Probably more important than any of this, as I've said, you can actually get example policies very easily. And in fact, we're going to make available to you a checklist and some example policies on this site. Most importantly, I would say, is that it is communicated and implemented. It's not worth the paper it's written on if you're not doing either of those things. So I'm actually just going to put an asterisk beside those because personally I believe those are possibly the two most important aspects of your environmental policy. So the fact that it's communicated, have a think about who you need to communicate your policy to. Certainly it needs to be to all of your members of staff. Everybody that works for your organisation needs to know what the company is striving for and what you're actually working towards. It needs to be communicated and understood by your staff. And that is something that auditors would check for if they came to inspect your company. They might ask people around your workforce, have they seen the environmental policy statement? Do they know what the company's commitment is? But it's not just communicating it internally, it must be available externally to anybody that asks for it. You might want to actively communicate it to your suppliers, in fact, your whole supply chain, any subcontractors that are working for you, or any of your main clients. That's entirely up to yourself, but whether you actively communicate it or not, you must make it available to the public upon request. So should anybody telephone your organisation and ask for a copy, it needs to be standard practice to send that out. One thing you might want to consider is how you display it. Is it displayed in your reception? Is it on your website so people can easily access it? That's all good practice. And finally, and importantly, it must be implemented. Whatever statements you write on your policy, you must be able to demonstrate evidence that you've implemented everything against that policy. And only then is it really a truly valuable policy and worth the time you've put into developing it. So I think that's everything. There's some more helpful tools on the website, and good luck. Thanks.